In 1914, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, was shot, starting World War I as we know it. But what if he had survived the assassination attempt? How does this change the Great War? But also Franz Ferdinand coming to rule Austria-Hungary in 1916 instead of Charles I. Historically, in the month of June 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne visited the city of Sarajevo, which was part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, a region which the Austro-Hungarian Empire had annexed only 6 years prior. The Archduke and his wife Sophie would be touring the town in a caravan of cars when suddenly a bomb would be thrown at their car, missing them, but wounding many in the car behind them. Later, after the driver took a wrong turn, the car would break down in front of a coffee shop. Suddenly, Austria's biggest hater turned up and would fire several shots at the Archduke and his wife. Driver takes a wrong turn. Ferdinand: "Oh, looks like you took a wrong turn." Driver: "Oh, sorry, but hey, it's not like 17 million people are gonna die because of it, right?" Historically, Gavrilo Princip, the assassin of Franz Ferdinand, was a very bad shot with firearms, apparently being the worst out of the 6 assassins. If we just double down on this by limiting the amount of training that he had received, which was already minimal, we can improve the Archduke's survival chances. In that case, Gavrilo Princip would be arrested and thrown into prison. Austria-Hungary would be furious, like they were in our own history, so an ultimatum would be sent to Serbia. This ultimatum, much like in our own timeline, would be harsh, but not as harsh. Basically, Austria would demand that the Black Hand would have to be dissolved, with anti-Austrian propaganda being stopped in Serbia and a few other minor things. These, I think, are all reasonable demands, and unlike the ultimatum of our own history, this one would be accepted by Serbia. Historically, even Russia urged Serbia to accept the ultimatum, hoping that the tides would shift against Austria-Hungary eventually. In this alternate history, we can have the Austrians to investigate the Black Hand, and I assume that just like in our own history, they wouldn't find any solid evidence that this group is linked to Serbia and was receiving funds from the Serbian government. War, for now, would be avoided. However, as Franz Joseph's health started to deteriorate, panic would begin to spread around the empire. Since Franz Ferdinand is alive, he would be taking the throne in late 1916, with the Great War still not starting, meaning that there would be a lot of conflict of interest. Now, for the sake of this video, I would assume that the Great War wouldn't start in 1914 or 1915, as Austria-Hungary wouldn't invade Serbia, triggering the web of alliances. This is done because Serbia would accept the Austrian ultimatum, which would be less harsh. Of course, there could be another reason that starts the Great War, but we can't ever know. So I would have Franz Ferdinand to rule Austria-Hungary in 1916, with a war still not starting, but the continent is still very tense, and Germany would be urging to start a war before the arrival of Russia gets too strong and undefeatable. Franz Ferdinand's policies are kind of weird. He wanted to give more autonomy to minorities, but strengthen the power of the government, and also supported Germans gaining more influence in the nation. Historically, he was also very anti-Hungarian. He wrote about this a lot. According to him, the Hungarians are all rebel. Nobody really knows whether we should call him a liberal or a conservative, as he just kinda dips in both sides from time to time and expects it to work. He had plans for a United States of Greater Austria, but these were highly unrealistic. Another interesting idea is that he would have a light hand towards Serbia, not because he liked them, but because he didn't want to fight a dead war with Russia. Smarter than his uncle, I guess. In 1915 and 1916, politics would start to change in Hungary. The Party of Independence and 48 would begin to rise in popularity, albeit not much. All the minorities would continue to vote for the National Party of Work, which favored the Austro-Hungarian compromise. They didn't like it, however they preferred that to a Hungarian ethno-state. The minorities of the rest of the empire would be cautious but optimistic, as Franz Ferdinand promised more autonomy. One of the first things I could see Franz Ferdinand doing is signing off an official treaty of non-aggression with Serbia to secure their southern flank, as well as to get on Russia's good side. I predict that Franz Ferdinand would put limits on the Hungarian portion of the army, as he knows that the Hungarians would be opposed to losing land in his federalization plans, but also he would push for the official language of the entire army to become German. This wouldn't go well with the Hungarian portion of the empire. Many of the politicians of the Party of Independence and 48 would use this as a basis to build popularity, and the party's voice would continue to grow. Before long, Franz Ferdinand would turn towards his promises of more autonomy. He would firstly focus on Bohemia, Bosnia and Croatia, territories he had the most sympathy for and were mostly under Austrian control. While he couldn't do anything radical like at a third crown, I suspect that he could create a situation in Bosnia like the Kingdom of Croatia and Slavonia in Hungary. While Hungary retained over Croatia, the region had its own parliament and a little autonomy. The Hungarian government still had a lot of influence and most of the power, but it was more than what some minorities in the empire had gotten. If Franz Ferdinand established the Kingdom of Bosnia, it wouldn't surprise me if he gave it Austrian Dalmatia as well. Franz Ferdinand would pressure Hungary to give the Kingdom of Croatia and Slavonia more autonomy, but the Hungarians would of course refuse. Before long, Bohemia would get a similar minor kingdom, but the situation would be more confusing. The famous Sudetenland is part of Bohemia, but is mostly German, with Franz Ferdinand wanting to strengthen the German control over the empire. He doesn't want to lose these lands to a separate minor crown. Franz Ferdinand drew this map in 1906 about the United States of Greater Austria, as he had planned for it, and I replicated this to the best of my abilities. I don't know what he was doing there, as portions of Bohemia that were ethnically German were given their own states, instead of staying with German Austria. They would be called German Bohemia and German Moravia, and technically be separate crowns. Now, this would immediately raise an issue, as these two minor crowns would concern the German nationalists in Austria-Hungary, who wanted a large German majority state. By making separate kingdoms for the German people, how would this accomplish that? Also, by now, Hungary would begin to face protests and political movements, undoubtedly opening up new parties and other political opportunities. Many of the minorities within Hungary would demand similar kingdoms like Austria was doing, while the Hungarian nationalists would urge Hungary to fully leave the empire, rather than to be divided up. The chaos would still swell up until Franz Ferdinand would fire the Hungarian Prime Minister István Tisza, whom he had considered to be a revolutionary and a traitor. This move would be the straw that would break the camel's back, as the Hungarian portion of the empire would be in an open revolt, repeating the events of 1848. I believe that Franz Ferdinand would be quick to disband the Honvedzek, which is the Hungarian branch of the army. He would also allow Austrian troops to occupy Croatia, effectively increasing its autonomy to be on par with Bosnia. These actions would cause further spread of revolt, with Austria trying to calm the flames. Neighboring nations like Russia and Italy would begin to turn their eyes to the empire, debating on how they should respond to the situation. Germany would offer to send troops to help Austria, but Franz Ferdinand would most likely decline this, as he wouldn't want to make it seem that Austria is weak and that it has to resort to allowing foreigners to fix their problems. This is referring to the Austrians in 1848, requesting Russian support as to quell the Hungarian Revolution of 1848. Franz Ferdinand would start to go around and make speeches stating that he wants to reform the empire, to allow everyone to have a say in what goes on in the country, and most importantly that the Hungarians are hindering his progress. He would further promise similar kingdoms to Bosnia to any minorities who helped the Austrians to defeat the Hungarians. The Slovaks would be the first to jump on this offer, followed by the Romanians. With this help, as well as the Hungarian army disbanded and disarmed, I don't believe that the rebellion would last long. Within 3 months, Hungary would be under martial law. Not only that, but Slovakia would gain a kingdom immediately, and Austria would annex minor portions of Hungary, such as Burgenland. It would take a bit longer, but soon Transylvania would also become its own kingdom as well, leaving what remains of the Hungarian crown under martial law. I foresee that by mid-1917, Franz Ferdinand would change the name of Austria-Hungary to the United States of Greater Austria, and to carve out the states as he wishes, with one exception. To the south of Austria, in Tyrol, there were very large amounts of Italian speakers, and some of this land was land that Italy had claims on. While officially the two countries were in alliance with them and Germany, now cracks would appear between the two sides. With a little German pressure, I believe that Franz Ferdinand would allow the Italian majority territories in Tyrol to go to Italy as to secure their allegiance, instead of creating a separate Italian crown. In exchange, Austria would gain monetary compensation or better trade deals. Remember that in this alternate history the Great War still hasn't started, but I believe it's inevitable, so there would have to be an alternate event that would spark the Great War, which is impossible to know which one it would be. So I would have to come up with one that would trigger the Great War in 1917 or 1918. So by now you may be thinking, oh well, this is great, all the minorities got autonomy, Austria has control over the nation, and Hungary is also under control. Nothing can go wrong. And to that I would say that this is a multi-ethnic empire, so it rarely ends well. Despite the fact that Franz Ferdinand gave autonomy to all of the minorities, he wasn't a good guy when it came to representation in government. Apparently, he was a firm anti-democrat, and once said, politics is a matter only of the ruler, while the people and the masses have to obey. Many German nationalists would have mixed feelings on him, with some of them supporting the consolidation of power to boost German influence, while others would argue that the autonomy he gave to everyone would work against them and make it harder for the Germans to force their will onto them. Overall, I think that Austria-Hungary has gotten less stable for now. Slowly, the people of the empire would demand more and more autonomy, unhappy with their lack of representation in the government, and that all of the officials are basically controlled by the king, one way or another. Franz Ferdinand would try to negotiate with the people, but he would be unyielding and often get into fights with their leaders. What Franz Ferdinand would be trying to accomplish is simply impossible. A nation where the government has most if not all of the power, but the minorities get autonomy. It was only a matter of time until it collapsed. Franz Ferdinand would most likely be able to calm down a few of the smaller minorities, such as the Sudeten Germans, Italian Istrians and maybe Slovenians. However, I don't see the rest of the states becoming as calm. One by one, these states would begin to experience protests and revolts, similar to the Hungarian revolt a few years prior, but on a much larger scale. Neighboring nations like Romania, Serbia and Russia would send aid into some of the revolting minorities, while Germany would back Franz Ferdinand and his government. I would estimate that by 1919 a civil war would break out, starting in Bosnia. This revolt would spread to Croatia, Vojvodina and Transylvania. Before the government has any time to react, the entire southern and eastern portion of the country would be in open revolt. As Franz Ferdinand would order his troops to suppress the rebellions, the Hungarians would also begin their attacks in an attempt to restore their old territories. To the north, Russian-backed Ukrainians and Poles would start taking major cities like Krakow and Lviv, stopping government administrations in the states. Franz Ferdinand would thus declare a national emergency and mobilize the entire army, a good portion of which would have already been fired, disbanded or executed for possible relations to the revolts. Within a few months, I suggest that the borders look something like this. By now, it would be foolish to believe that there would be no outsider influence. For example, Russia would be, as stated before, aiding Ukraine and Poland in hopes of establishing puppet states. Serbia would be sending weapons to Bosnia and Croatia, as well as take this time to undo many of the restrictions placed upon them in 1914, which was the ultimatum that Austria-Hungary would send to Serbia. Romania would also be sending a lot of aid to Transylvania, a territory that they had wanted to annex for a long time. Austria proper would be gaining support from Germany, as well as little from the Italians. I also expect Italy to ask kindly for the rest of the Italian majority territories in Istria in exchange for more support, which I think would be granted by the Austrian side. Basically, Austria is like a domino, you push one and the whole empire collapses. It's like a house of cards, looking stable and strong, until a minor issue collapses the whole structure. France and the United Kingdom would be watching from afar, not doing anything major like supporting either side, but would prepare to get involved if needed. Now, don't get me wrong, they still don't want Germany to remain strong, but also they would be aware of the Russian influence in the region, as they don't want this giant in Eastern Europe to take over and become the hegemon of Europe. Perhaps France and Britain kind of let Germany and Russia exhaust themselves a bit, before pursuing a more aggressive German policy. This is because if France and Britain were to declare war on Germany, then Russia would soon become the dominant power in Europe, and France and Britain would need to worry about them after Germany is dealt with. This alternate Austrian Civil War could end in any possibilities. Perhaps Austria, being the only one with an official army and receiving the most aid, manages to unite most of the empire, with minor concessions to Serbia, Romania and Russia. But this would be very boring, as then the Great War would start in a similar way and we would have the exactly same outcome. Maybe the war dissolves into trench warfare and the borders don't change for a few years, until peace is signed and looks similar to the map above. But this is also boring and would look ugly. Maybe Hungary rebounds and gains their glorious borders as the rest of the empire is picked apart by neighboring countries. While this is not boring, it's too unrealistic. What I'm trying to say here is that there is no way to predict the exact outcome of this war. From here on now, just keep that in mind. This is pure fiction. Also keep in mind that the following decisions have sacrificed a lot of realism. Franz Ferdinand being the monarch of Austria-Hungary and reforming the empire is an obvious sign that this is unrealistic. As usual, I would sacrifice some realism as to create a more entertaining scenario. Now, with this civil war, there will be temporary alliances from the start. For example, in the south, Croatia and Bosnia would most likely agree to team up as to defend themselves better. Bosnia already has what it wants, while Croatia probably does want a piece of Bosnia, but it'd be more strategic for them to ally with them for the time being. In Galicia, Ukrainians and Polish people would be in some sort of armed truce, mostly being forced upon by Russia. While Poland would absolutely love to take over Ukraine, they would have to follow orders and quite frankly don't have the troops to spare. Hungary would be informally allied to Serbia, the Hungarian majority region of Transylvania. These two countries would cooperate and try to take down Transylvania and eventually unite with a possible autonomy. The Czechs and Slovaks would also be probably willing to cooperate with each other, as they're both surrounded by enemies and have got similar aspects. Also, Slovakia would be very desperate. Franz Ferdinand would most likely wish to take over Bohemia first, which contained most of Austria's industry, as well as a sizable German population. The bulk of the Austrian army would be sent there, due to the fact that if they take the industry, they can take the upper hand in the Civil War later. The Austrian offensives would focus on going towards Prague, the capital of Bohemia. They would go well, but I think the Czech forces, along with Slovakians too, would be able to launch a devastating attack near Bratislava as to divert the Austrian army. To the south, Croatians and Bosnians would manage to keep the Hungarians at bay. Hungary would however keep the bulk of their armies in Transylvania, as they would attempt to link up with Sekerland. In Galicia, Poland and Ukraine would remain on the defense, with the Carpathian Mountains protecting them from any major invasions for now, so they can focus on gaining recognition and support for their cause. I don't want to go into the specifics of this war, as it would be simply impossible, but I can go to the results. A little over a year and a half into the war, Austria would be collapsing. An exhausted army, paired with an unpopular leadership, would lead into a civil coup, ousting and probably executing Franz Ferdinand. No matter what universe we're in, the Archduke simply cannot catch a break. Upon hearing of this coup d'etat, Germany would send an army to occupy the remaining territory of Austria, as Hungary would rush to occupy Burgenland. Upon hearing of Germany practically annexing Austria, Russia would immediately protest this action, stating that Germany was threatening the balance of power. France and the United Kingdom would do nothing and let the situation play out. After a few weeks, Russia would then launch an invasion of Galicia, annexing the Ukrainian majority portions and ceding the Polish portions to the Congress of Poland. This would piss off Germany a lot, which now knows that the Polish people within their own borders would soon cause trouble. Demands would begin to fly around on both sides, and Europe is looking even more tense than them in 1914, before the Great War had even started. Out of all of this, I totally expect war to be declared. I don't know how, maybe there is an attack done by accident, but for the sake of this video, we would say that Russia declares war on Germany, after a shootout near Moravia. Out of fear of Bohemia getting chummy with Russia, Germany would declare war on Bohemia, after the outbreak of the war. I can fully see Germany reaching out to Hungary to offer an alliance, in which Germany would promise the full reunification of the lost Hungarian lands. Hungary, despite the fact of not liking the Germans, would have to accept this deal. Within a few days, Germany and Russia would be in an all-out war, and with Russia being much more prepared, this war would start at around 1922, about 6 years later than in our own history. To the west, France and the United Kingdom are unsure what to do. Sure, Germany annexing Austria is a massive problem, but Russia was the one who declared the war, which would make them the aggressors. This isn't what the Triple Entente was for, it was for defensive purposes only. However, I suspect that after a month of fighting, France would declare war on Germany as to regain their lost territories and establish zones of influence in Germany. This is due to a variety of factors, such as land or colonial gains, and fear that Russia is starting to lose, or maybe the public wanting it. Either way, France would join this war. The United Kingdom would for now remain out of the war, not wanting to waste resources on a war where they were the aggressors. The Germans would be doing fine work in Bohemia, taking over the country in a matter of weeks. Italy would join the war on the side of the Central Powers. Right after, France would join the war as well, but the Italians would practically do nothing. Italy's economy would have just recovered from the Italo-Turkish War, no more than 2 years ago. Italy would begin to develop their armed forces and focus on just distracting the French troops. However, a small amount of Italian troops would launch an operation coordinating with the Hungarians against the South Slavs. This offensive would go well, but ultimately failed to achieve its goal. Serbia and Montenegro would officially join the war on the side of Russia, in hopes of securing freedom for the Bosnian and Croatian states. Germany would be in an opposite position from our own timeline. In this alternate history, they went through Bohemia as to get around their border with Russia, and would want to defeat the Russians quickly so they can turn around and beat France. I find this quite humorous. Basically, Germany would focus on defeating Russia first, so they wouldn't initiate the Schlieffen plan just yet. Before long, the German spring offensive against Russia would slowly commence, with mass casualties on both sides. In the west, the French troops would launch brutal attacks on their border, threatening to punch through their lines. Germany would demand that Italy invade France's south as to alleviate pressure from their other fronts. Italy would follow through with this invasion, but it would fail to make any meaningful gains, as they're trying to attack into a mountain tile, something you should never do without first getting the mountaineer tech and choosing this division template. By 1923, most of the land that Austria-Hungary used to control would now be under the Central Powers' occupation, with the exception of Bosnian, Galician and Transylvanian territories. As Hungary would for now only occupy Slovakia and parts of Croatia, while Germany would occupy all of Moravia, and they have already annexed the Austrian portion. Before long, Germany would be on the defense once again, with trench warfare becoming common, so the cost of Germany continuing to conquer Russia would outweigh the benefits. Seeing the stalemate in the war, Romania could join the Entente in hopes of getting Transylvania. While this would result in minor gains to be made, the situation wouldn't change much due to the geography of the region. By the next year, Germany would be getting desperate. Russia isn't even close to surrendering, and they hardly occupy anything of France just yet. Germany could try to ally with Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, but due to the Central Powers being in a worse position than they were historically, I would say that this wouldn't happen. So, at this point, Germany would have to do something stupid if they want to win the war somehow. They would do the Schlieffen Plan. A similar situation would occur here, with Germany asking to go through neutral Belgium, while the Belgians would refuse, and Germany would invade them. They wouldn't get as far as in our own timeline, and probably get stuck before they took Brussels. As a response of the German aggression, the United Kingdom, following their end of a defensive treaty with Belgium, would also declare war on Germany. Without delaying it any further, the Central Powers would be defeated, but the peace treaty would look drastically different from what we had in our own history. Russia hasn't suffered a communist revolution, and the United States of America isn't in the war most likely. So the liberal and proponent of self-determination, Woodrow Wilson, would be replaced by the imperialist Nicholas II, who together with France would desire to partition Germany. First up, Africa and Asia would be divided like they were historically. However, Italy would be forced up to give Somalia and Eritrea to the United Kingdom, and Libya to France, destroying any hopes of the Italians for their colonial empire. Now let's play a game that it's called Screw Over the Central Powers. All jokes aside, let's start with Italy. In the mainland, I would predict that Italy would only lose Aosta to France, as well as the Italians having to pay massive reparations, and have to return territories they took from Croatia and the newly established Austrian state. So Italy would also lose Tyrol and Istria to Austria, which would become independent once again and break away from the German sphere. Italy would also have to pay thousands in reparations, as well as to demilitarize its border with France. Italy in general would get off somewhat light, due to them dropping out of the war first and quickly. Germany would be forced to return Alsace-Lorraine, as well as the Rhinish territories, and Baden, which are likely to become independent, but heavily influenced by France. To the north, Denmark would come further down and take over the entire peninsula, despite the king's direct request not to do that. In the east, Russia would take everything east of the Oder River, which Nicholas II historically wanted to do. The rest of Germany is likely to be broken up, with southern Catholic German states like Bavaria breaking off and being in the Austrian sphere of influence. I would assume that Austria would remain under the Habsburgs for legitimacy reasons, and Charles I would become the country's monarch. In the former Austria-Hungary, Croatia and Bosnia would gain independence and likely join Serbia in the future, while Slovakia and Bohemia may appoint a Russian nobleman as king and form a Czechoslovak kingdom. Serbia would be pushed north, gaining West Banat and Vojvodina, later taking Montenegro and forming Yugoslavia. Romania would take Bukovina, but not only Transylvania, they would take everything up to the Tisa River as to act as a natural barrier against Hungary. The Hungarians would also cede Burgenland to Austria and drastically limit their army size. And so we have reached eternal peace, theoretically. Surely Italy wouldn't go ultra-nationalist with this humiliating peace treaty, but also North Germany. After the war, Russia would have carved out itself a sizable sphere of influence, including Poland, Czechoslovakia and potentially Romania, probably Yugoslavia as well. The West would begin to fear this sudden growth of Russia and begin to drift away from them. Over time, France and the United Kingdom may attempt some reapproachment with Italy and North Germany, although I can't say for sure how this would go from there. Historically, there were socialist uprisings in Germany and Italy, so perhaps these countries could go communist instead of ultra-nationalist, but this is just one possible outcome. Maybe Germany and Italy join the West in exchange for lightening their treaties, or returning of lost lands. Perhaps Germany sides with Russia and you know what, no, this is too unrealistic, never mind. Zooming out, Europe drastically looks different, with Franz Ferdinand surviving, and he couldn't manage to reform the empire and make a lasting impact. I suggest you take a look at this scenario, where Serbia actually accepts the Austro-Hungarian ultimatum in 1914. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you there. Goodbye.